Welcome to the Commercial Edge podcast with me, Chris Webber. Come and enjoy a virtual coffee while I share my experience and ideas that could help you overcome difficult people at work. I share my thinking and insights so that you can find new ways to overcome challenges and gain a commercial edge and unleash the power of people. Welcome to this week's episode of the podcast. Before I get into the topic, which this week is going to be about people who drive you crazy with emails, I want to talk a little bit about the podcast itself and what we're trying to do with it and why it's there. Foxley is a business which is all about helping people overcome difficult people at work. Life is tough at the moment. It's hard. I've seen a number of posts online of people looking for work. I've got friends at the moment whose companies are resizing, and it's not easy. It's not easy when we're also dealing with tough people at work, with difficult people at work. Sometimes that is customers who are just hard to do business with. Sometimes it's colleagues who we struggle to connect with, struggle to influence, those in different departments particularly. And sometimes it's managers, people that we work for or people who work for us. And we struggle to connect with them, struggle to work productively with them, all that kind of stuff. That's what Foxley is all about. That's what this podcast is all about. Trying to find these people, identify some traits, some issues, some problems that they cause us, and try and unpick, understand their problems, understand what they're doing, why they're doing it, and see how we can do better. How can we understand them more, connect with them more? And so every podcast episode is designed as a way of helping us to pick out somebody, identify the problems that they cause us, and then come up with some solutions, some strategies that we can adopt to try and be productive, to try and overcome these difficult people. Because what we understand is that is where there's a commercial edge. We can all do business with people that we like. You don't need help there. You're all doing great. Where we need help are the bumps in the road, are the challenges, are the difficult moments. And that's what this podcast is all about, helping you overcome the bumps in the road, emerge from the darkness when you're trying to overcome difficult people. And so hopefully, episode by episode, you can start to connect and identify the people that are causing us problems and find ways to overcome them, strategies that you can use straight away to be more productive and gain a commercial edge. So this episode, what are we going to talk about? Well, we're going to talk about emailing instead of talking. I've come across some stuff recently where it's come up with customers who are saying, clients of mine who are saying they've got customers who simply don't want to have a conversation. They email all the time. I know people who run their business this way. There are significantly long email chains, and they're trying to make decisions, trying to include people in these email chains. And it can become incredibly frustrating, incredibly difficult because people are on emails all the time and not having a conversation. But then there's another problem, which is when you're in a meeting and people are then distracted by their emails or messages. Let's say, we also have Teams chats and Slack chats that are open, and people are doing those as well. And these are all causing us problems. So what we're going to talk about is lengthy email chains. What does it mean for us? Why do people do it? So what's the justification for emailing and messaging so much? What actually happens? So not what do they say is the value, but what's happening there, and the impact on culture. And I also want to then pick out what good culture looks like, and then want to get into talking a bit about the people that are at the center of businesses and performance, and therefore how people are feeling and what we should be looking for. And then I want to give you some tips on how to create and lead that culture and bring that change to life. So let's get into it. Let's talk about lengthy email chains. Well, the biggest thing that I think this causes is a problem on decision making. I talked to somebody recently who was saying to me, it's not unusual for them to receive an email from their boss, copied to a few colleagues to say, hey, we need to do something a bit different. We need to change something at work. And I here's my suggestions. What do you think? Then the next thing, somebody else is included in the email chain because they might have an opinion or they've been involved in something like this before. And so they're copied in. They then copied in and say, oh, no, it's not me anymore. I've moved on to a different department. It's somebody else. And so that gets passed on. And even answering the question and coming up with ideas has created a long email chain. Never mind getting into the chain. And that doesn't even count when people are on holidays. So you send them an email, they're not there, they come back a week or so later, they take time to get through their emails, then a follow-up email is sent and they've not had a chance to contribute to it. So then they contribute to it. And it just goes on and on and on. And that's really slow decision making. There are way too many people included. Other departments, other teams are added simply because they can be. The great thing about a meeting is that you have to be present. And when we have these asynchronous things, then you can just keep adding people. It can go on and on and on. And that's fine. There's a role to play in getting people's different ideas. But when you find that your life is ruled by lengthy email chains, lengthy messages, huge groups of people all contributing to a chat, that's going to be tough. It's going to slow down stuff. And it also dissolves decision-making authority. That's an interesting one because as a boss, you perhaps want your team to operate in a different way, or you want them to interact with other people in a different way. And you should be responsible for that. You should be leading that decision-making. But as soon as you start to add more and more people into the group, it's unclear who is going to make the decision. And I think that causes problems too, because now you're in a situation where no one's really sure who has the final say. And I think this is where we end up with defaulting to the most senior people in the chain and feeling like perhaps our views weren't even considered or included. And it's partly because of the process of decision-making being so lengthy and convoluted. So why do people say that they do this? What's the explanation? What are the justifications for having such long email chains? Well, one of them that I hear is that people say that they can work in parallel. They can multitask. They can be working on one email and one project responding to someone. Another email comes in, it pops up. They can click on that. They can have a look through that. They can respond to it. They can go back to the other thing. So that they're saying to themselves, actually, I'm more productive because I'm doing 2, maybe 3 things at the same time. So that's quite a strong argument that people bring in, that they're more productive. Their argument is, well, if I'm in a 30-minute meeting and I turn off my emails and I'm concentrating on that meeting, most of that meeting is a waste of my time. I don't need to be there. And therefore, I could be more productive. And that also leads to while I'm in a meeting, also I'm going to be doing messages on the side. And so this argument of I'm actually more productive. Another argument that I hear is that people use emails and messages as a task list. It gives them a way of working through their day. So this is like their way, what do I need to do? Well, it's the priority that's in my inbox. It's the thing that's at the top of the pile. And that's what guides my decision-making. What am I going to do? And therefore, having everything on email keeps me up to date with the priorities, keeps me up to date with what's happening. It means that it's in my field of view. I open my laptop, my emails pop up, my messages pop up, and I know exactly where I am. Another thing that I think is really interesting is record keeping. When you've got an email and an email chain, you can go back to it. You can revisit it. Someone asks you later about a problem or what was said during that conversation, you can immediately just go straight back and look at the email and say, this is what I wrote down, or this is what I proposed, or this was the question that was asked. And it gives you a really clear record. And there are certain times in certain businesses where that is a very, very important element. And the final thing that people argue is a big thing is that it helps them keep people informed, like their manager. So it helps their manager to feel like, yes, I'm including you on the messages so you know where we are on these particular projects, on these particular programs. And that means that makes life much more straightforward because they feel like I've got oversight, I've got thought on around me so that other people are supporting me. My manager knows what's going on. However, the world is not how they see it. First of all, you cannot multitask. You cannot do things in parallel. Despite what everyone says or despite what people argue, there is absolutely no evidence that it is possible to be doing two things at the same time. And in fact, there is a cost to doing so. When you switch from one task to another, it's distracting. And it takes you 60 seconds to 2 minutes just to catch up with where you are. And the problem is that if you're in a meeting and someone asks you a question, or a question is raised and you're reading messages that have come in, you are not there. You are not ready to answer that. You're not ready to join in. And that means that you are not contributing positively to that meeting. In fact, one of the reasons why meetings are unproductive is because of this, because people are doing things in parallel. They're actually not at the meeting. They're just sitting there physically. And so this idea of being able to do things in parallel is nonsense. The most productive people focus on priorities. They cast time to those priorities and then they switch and focus on the next thing. And there are so many tools now built into our systems where we can create do not disturbs on our phones and our messages so that we can do this. We can join a meeting and our meeting messages will pop up later because of the importance of being focused. The second thing is that if your email box is your task list, then as more messages come in, tasks move down to the bottom. And it's not the efficient system that you think it is. It gets flooded by it. And especially as emails get longer and longer and longer, as email change and other people get involved, then it just becomes more complicated. And it doesn't, you're actually generating work. So if you send an email to 5 people and 4 people reply to that, you've now got to read those 4 replies. You've got to digest those 4 replies before you can reply. That takes longer. If you're in a meeting, even if you're about to make a point, somebody else makes a similar point, you don't make your point because it's been raised by someone else. In an email chain, all those come in. You have to read them and digest them before you can respond to them. The time taken for one person to respond through an email chain is probably way longer than of having had a 20 to 30 minute meeting. And I think one of the disciplines that people need to build is getting better at shorter meetings. Meetings do not need to be 30 minutes. They can be a 10-minute conversation. We don't do enough phone calling. We don't do enough 5 to 10 minutes quick chats. That is where the magic is. And I think that's a big thing. And of course, the idea that you're keeping your boss up to date relies on the fact that your boss is simply checking their emails and reading through everything. More often than not, what you're going to find is that you go to a one-to-one with your boss, you're going to say, oh, what do you think of what's been going on? And they're like, I don't know. Because they haven't been keeping up to date. They haven't been reading everything you think they've been reading. And so you have to update them anyway. So this idea of them being part of the oversight is also nonsense. And I think there's a bigger problem in that it affects culture. It affects the culture of the organization, the business that you're in. What does it say about your business that a good day of work means reading and replying to lots of emails and messages? I remember working in a company many years ago and someone finishing a day and saying to me, oh, I've had a great day today. I've had 50 messages, 50 emails to reply to, and I got through them all. And not realizing that that's generating work and it's not actually producing anything. If the day is just responding to emails, what have you actually produced. And I know other people who work in similar ways. And you're now in a world where, yes, of course, you can work remotely because you're not talking to anyone, you're not involved in anyone, you're just dealing with emails. And so we're creating these cells around yourself where you're not engaging. People are more productive when you operate in a community, and a community means conversation. It does not mean chat on messaging. It doesn't mean email exchanges. And getting better at these short, sharp conversations is way better. I've worked in companies before where they have this kind of breakfast table approach where they group people together who are working together. And the idea is that you stimulate conversation, you hear phone calls and conversations, and it does stimulate discussion. And there's a wonderful book called The Culture Code by Dan Coyle, who talks about organizations who engineer connections and community through conversation. Now, I know that we work remotely. What I'm saying is that means we've got to work a bit harder to have conversations. We can't just rely on keyboards to communicate. Keyboards are one directional. The second issue with culture, I think, is that businesses turn inwards increasingly, and they start communicating more and more with itself. We're having conversations internally. And I had this realization a couple of years ago about Teams and Slack to some degree, but maybe less so, but where Microsoft Teams works beautifully if you work in the same organization. Creates the idea that you can create these groups and teams and you can share files and folders and have meetings and chats and conversations. But because I work across organizations, it's much harder for me. And I was asking myself the question, why would Microsoft build this thing that makes it so hard for people outside of organizations? And I realized that so much communication goes inside the organization and doesn't go external, doesn't go customer facing. Now, I know that a lot of people don't have externally facing roles, and I'm not saying that that's what we should be doing, but I do worry about companies who spend so much time talking to themselves, especially via emails and messages. Are they really thinking about what's important, what's being productive for the team and for the customer? And in an increasingly tense and competitive world where productivity and performance really matters, can we afford to spend so much time talking to ourselves? I worry about that customer experience that really gives us an edge. It's much safer to be emailing each other, but safety is not where performance is. And I think that's a challenge we need to think about. And I also worry about a culture where this email system is used to cover our backs. And I worry because it's a culture where people are worried about making mistakes, about getting things wrong, and about being blamed for those things. And that is a big worry of mine. If you're starting to see people in that sense, that they're keeping notes of things because they want to be able to go back to it, that's telling you something about the culture being negative. This is people who are more worried about being blamed than they are about being productive and performance. And that should be an indicator for leaders and for colleagues that these people are not feeling 100% safe. And what's happening that's creating that? Because when you look at great cultures, people feel safe to make decisions. They do. They feel empowered. They don't worry about being blamed for those things. Great cultures have lots of short, frequent, and targeted communications. People talk a lot in bursts. And it's a great example of what high performance teams actually look like. If you're observing a high performance team, you will see bursts of communication and conversation that's high intensity and targeted so that everyone knows what's going on. Email doesn't fit that brief at all. Email is one directional and it is broadcast. broadcast is not communication. Communication is two-way. It is listening and speaking. And listening in terms of the tone of voice, the intention, how people are feeling. Those are really hard to pick out from emails. Emails is one directional. I'm going to tell you what I think. It's pretty one dimensional and pretty dry. It's also not targeted. It's very impersonal, especially if you've got an email chain with a number of different people on. So you're moved away entirely from something of great culture, which is short, sharp, frequent, targeted communication, to one directional, broad base. A great performance culture has ideas that are discussed and then implemented. Discussed and then implemented, not constantly discussed. And this is the fear I have of long email chains. There's a lot of overanalysis going on here. Nobody really wants to make a decision. We're a bit nervous about making a decision in case we get it wrong. We want to cover our backs. We want other people involved. We want to make sure we've engaged every team. Why do we need to feel that we've engaged every team and every single stakeholder? Well, it can only be because we're afraid. We're afraid of what they might say. We're afraid of what they might do. And so that fear causes us not to do things. Great performance cultures don't worry about that because they discuss ideas. Yes, they involve different stakeholders. They are not just one person working in isolation. They've got teams doing stuff, but then they implement them. But what they do that's brilliant is they review. They reflect. So they don't overanalyze before they start. They don't spend hours trying to understand every single detail of what might happen. But what they do is go back. They go back, they review, they think, they reflect, and then they learn their lessons. Overanalysis of options pre-action just creates more fear and more indecision. And especially when most choices are not that business critical. You know, we have this over-analysis of everything that we do, and most things can be reversed. You know, something you decide to do, you can follow it for a quarter. I think about a marketing campaign. You can analyze it. And in fact, there's great performance stuff and measuring performance, which is about constantly managing and monitoring performance so that you can adapt. You know, don't think about all these decisions that have to be perfect each time. And that allows you to create a culture where you can go back and review. So let's summarize what are people feeling? People who over email, people who over message, who rely on messaging and emailing as their main communication. They don't like having a conversation. They don't want to talk to you. They want to be working in parallel. What are they feeling? Well, I think they're feeling unsafe. I think they're feeling disempowered. I think they're cautious. And I'm going to suggest that at times they are quite political. I think they're unsafe because they fear getting things wrong. I think they fear the challenge to their ego, and I think they fear the challenge to their status and their progression within the organization, the respect that people have for them. Perhaps they fear that. They're worried about that. They're disempowered. And maybe in the sense that they feel they need approval from others to take action. So without that approval, without the tick in the box from everybody, they want to take that risk. Now, it's perhaps connected to being unsafe, but it's also perhaps that they don't have that power, that others will point the finger at them. And they feel whether they're truly disempowered or whether they just feel disempowered, they certainly worry about that. And therefore, they're cautious. They perhaps a sense that it's better to be safe than sorry. You know, let's take my time. Let's allow others involved into this decision, because if I do that, then that's better than making a decision that I get blamed for. And then that leads to this thought about being political. That they're worried about their status, they're worried about networking, they're worried about being seen to do the right thing, to engage the right people. And so some of this is about political maneuvering just to avoid upset, to gain favor in certain departments, to be seen in certain ways. That's a worry. And I think that also happens a lot. So here's my challenge. What should they be thinking about? What should they be feeling? You want people across your team to feel confident that they've got support from the team and the manager, that they feel confident, that they are action-oriented people, and they're keen to complete tasks, not just to talk about them. And I love this concept of objectives, strategies, and tactics. And you have a series of tactics that contribute directly to your strategies. And this layered approach allows an organization to think through where are they going, what does success look like, how are they going to get there, and then what actions they need to take. And those tactics, I love the idea of people ticking them off. God, we don't do enough of this stuff. We don't have enough people going quarter by quarter and saying, this year I've got 3 or 4 key objectives I'm trying to hit, which is like, I don't know, 15, 20 different tactics. And I get to the end of Q1 and I've done that one, and I've done this one, and I've done the other one. We can tick them off. Success can be about stuff completed, coming off the task list. Too often we have this idea that we've got to keep them, they've got to last a year. These are my things for the year. And so if one of them is run a big event for customers or for internal colleagues, then after that, what do I do next? That's got to keep me busy all year. No, pivot, do something else. So get people action orientated, get people completing stuff, ticking stuff off. You want people to feel empowered to make decisions and move forward. And you want people to feel productive. I've done this, I've been moving towards my organizational goals, my business goals. So how can we do this? How can you create and lead a culture where people feel these things, where people feel confident, action orientated, empowered, and productive? Well, I think let's go back to this idea of objectives. Create clear objectives that are aligned to bigger goals. So think about your organizational strategy, your organizational objectives. How are you contributing to that? How are you supporting the business? And have objectives, strategies, and tactics. And your team and your colleagues are responsible for delivering tactics, for doing those things. And there's so much pride in being able to complete those things. And you can have people working to task lists, which are subheaded with strategies. What are they actually contributing to? And that task list can keep growing during the year. You can create some and tick them off and go to the next. And then, of course, your strategies are reviewed periodically, whatever that is, however your organization does that, year by year, 3 years, whatever it might be. But that happens. But your goals tend to be a bit more consistent. And that allows the organization, your team, to know where this direction is and just keep churning out productivity and be known for someone who gets stuff done. And not feel like they're having to fill their days with tasks that, just don't, just emails because, well, I need to be busy. Because this is one of my other thoughts, that people love to be busy. And if they don't feel like they've got a lot of stuff to do, and if they feel like, if I can get everything done quickly, that's going to look bad on me, I want to be busy, then they're going to generate work. And we see this a lot. So don't let them do that. Let's keep being productive, keep delivering more tactics against the same strategies. I also think that you want to build a culture of people that's about review rather than cautious decision making. So encourage not over-analysis before you do something, but analysis after. And organizations don't do this enough. Don't sit down. I'm working on a project with some partners at the moment, and we really try and focus on building this culture of review. It's a really important thing for us. And we actually sat down ahead of some important client engagements and just did a review of where we are right now. And we did make some serious changes to how we felt things were going with the client, because we just felt like we weren't quite delivering the expectations of the client. And you know what? It was a really important thing, because we were working to time pressures and to deadlines, quite high risks of failure, and we want to get it right. And by reviewing where we were, we recognized we perhaps weren't. So build this culture of review rather than proactive analysis, and it allows you to course correct. Where have we got so far? It's like navigating somewhere and just planning your route before you leave and never checking, just heading off and kind of going, yeah, it's okay, we're fine, we'll be fine, and not getting to a checkpoint and looking and saying, right, where are we at? And that's what they're called, checkpoints. Check where you are. So build this review rather than analysis beforehand. And the final part of it, I think, is that work to values. I talk a lot about results and relationships. And so far, this episode has been all about results, getting stuff done. And the feelings that are underpinning some of this negativity, these feelings of unsafeness, that comes from perhaps a company which isn't aligned to its values. So if you've got a values-based organization, which is all about teamwork, which is all about support, which is all about help, which is all about collaboration, and many organizations have these things, then that should be really important. And collaboration means positive support, working together. It doesn't mean including everybody in every email. And it means working together and trusting each other to perform. And if the team is implementing tactics and they're doing so in line with their values and they pass the ethics test, and the ethics test is really simple, if someone did this to me, how would I feel? Then you're probably all right. You can trust people to get stuff done. And so as a manager, as a leader, as a colleague, you can say to people, look, if you're doing stuff which we know is going to be driving towards our strategy, and you're doing so in a way that is in line with our corporate values, and you're not breaking rules, and you're not doing things illegally, and you're not undermining trust from your colleagues because you're acting unethically, then trust them to get stuff done. And let's focus on review. And then when you focus on review, you might say, hey, how did this go? Could we have improved it? What would we do next time? That's a positive learning culture, not a negative blame culture. And I think we have a responsibility to kill long emails. I think that's the biggest tip to take away from this episode is if you're seeing emails start to grow, kill them. Have a meeting. Act. Say to people, look, this is getting crazy. Let's have a meeting. Let's act. Be courageous and cutting people out. Do you want to get stuff done? Is it worthwhile waiting for 3 weeks for someone to come back from holiday to finish a project that they're working on? Is their input really that important? And I think too often they're not. We are overly cautious and ask ourselves, could we be more courageous? Could we work in pods? Identify pods of people who are focusing on a particular project. Get some stakeholders, cross-functional, maybe outside the department if you need to. But this is the pod that's going to make decisions and it's going to move things forward. And this pod talks often. They don't just email each other. And they don't need to include every man and every dog and every person across the organization who may or may not be affected by this. If you can hold your hand up and say, we have genuinely engaged key people and cross-functional people, we've done our best to balance productivity and engagement and relationships, that's all you can do. We're all got busy lives. And I also think that leaders have a responsibility to be respectful during meetings. Force a no device policy during meetings. Create focus and attention. Don't allow people to be unproductive because they're trying to be productive by working in parallel. They're going to waste time. Encourage short meetings. Base them on conversations. Don't base them on slides. I love the Amazon model. I'm not a huge fan of Amazon as a business, but I love that they don't use slides, that they don't use PowerPoint. It's very conversation based. And they have a memo that people read. Goodness me, I give people case studies on my workshops. I can give them 10 or 15 minutes to read a case study, completely unfamiliar topic. They sit around, they all sit in a group reading for 10 minutes, and then they start planning on that exercise. Goodness me. If we'd given them a deck for someone to present, that deck would take 45 minutes to an hour to go through because people just can't gain information the same way they can from reading through. Just give people a document, let them read it, and then have a conversation. Kill the lengthy emails. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. Hope you enjoyed the concept of what I'm trying to do with this podcast. And I look forward to talking to you in the next episode. Thanks for listening to the Commercial Edge podcast. I'll be back soon with another episode. Join me then when we delve into more difficult conversations. See you next time.